G'day, it's Coach Pete from Ascension. On this Whiteboard Wednesday, we're going to discuss exercise order. When it comes to scheduling or designing an individual session inside of a program, we need to work out what order we do specific exercises in. So how do we schedule individual exercises in a session, especially when it comes to resistance training? Well, that's a really good question. So we're going to look at a few ideas on how to schedule it, and then have a methodology of how we should actually arrange individual exercises. At the end of the day though, regardless if we're a beginner, if we're looking for general health and fitness, if we're more advanced or if we're elite in a particular sport, we really need to think about what our priority is and what our goals are. And that's really the framework we should work within. So what is important for someone looking for general health and the exercises they use will differ for someone who's an elite powerlifter, for example. There are a few ideas out there on what the correct exercise order are, and there's a number of rules I've seen floating around. You might have seen them as well. However, at times they can be contradictory. So for example, some people will suggest we should do compound exercises before isolation exercises, or barbell exercises before dumbbell exercises, large muscle groups before smaller muscle groups. Also, strength work should generally be done before any conditioning work. There's also an idea that harder exercises should be done before easier exercises, and then even a few ideas about reps. Exercise with lower reps should be done before exercise with higher reps. And in simple programs, any one of those rules, or even all those rules, sometimes all work in conjunction. However, there are a lot of exceptions, and a major exception might be an exercise such as the Turkish get-up that people will use. It's working a large amount of muscle mass, it's relatively complex, but it's only a dumbbell exercise or a kettlebell exercise all the time. So should we do that before or after we do something like a bench press or a squat? And that's a really good question. And we also see with mixed model style training, some things, just what tactical athletes train, or even CrossFit and other similar functional fitness systems, a workout of the day will have a combination of different requirements and exercises. So there might be an idea that, you know what, high skill work should be done under fatigue because that's how I'm going to do it in my competition, or in battle, I should train the way that I'm going to compete or I'm going to have to fight. Now that isn't necessarily false, but there is a better way to go about how we arrange our actual exercises to be the most beneficial. Before we get into what the actual solution is, I want to rewind back to an earlier Whiteboard Wednesday where I discussed specificity. And this is what it really comes down to. Is our program should be more generalized at its beginning, and as we get closer and closer to our competition, it builds in specificity up until our competition day or our competition season, which is where our program is really as specific as it can be. Our competition really is the most specific thing we can do. So what is the solution to how we should organize our exercises, and then what happens when we have exercises that meet all these requirements but we still can't decide which one should go before the other exercise? Another example might be with powerlifting. Someone who wants to get stronger, they look at squats and deadlifts on the same day. Which one should be done first? So if we really go back to specificity and then look at what our actual priorities are and what our goals are for our training, that provides us a lot of direction. The solution to our problem, we should organize our exercises in terms of their priority. The most important exercises should be completed first, less important exercises should be completed last, and anything in between is done in between. Now if we're competing for a specific sport, such as a strength sport like powerlifting, or weightlifting like Mark and Jackson do, that makes sense. Now the most important exercises to them both is the snatch, the clean, and the jerk. So therefore any training session, they should be right at the top of what their sessions are. But if we look at both their programs, we generally find that most of their sessions do not start with the snatch, the clean, or the jerk. There's typically an exercise before that, and there's a very good reason why. The first step of the solution is organize exercises in terms of priority. But that is based on the specific context of whatever you're training for. The next thing, after we've considered what the actual priority are of our exercises in terms of their relative importance, is to look at the demand and the fatigue they have in our central nervous system. And that's really the framework I use when I design programs for anybody. So the exercises that require the greatest demand and also generally have the greatest amount of effort of our nervous system, and then typically have the greatest amount of fatigue of our nervous system, are done first. As the exercises are less demanding on our nervous system, follow more demanding exercises. We can also look at this in terms of how we arrange specific fitness qualities into a session. Whilst both Mark and Jackson will train for weightlifting, they're not only training one specific fitness quality. They actually have to train speed, strength, power, mobility, flexibility, timing, coordination. The most demanding exercise or type of exercise you can do for your central nervous system is technical or skill work. And if we have our sport, anything related to technical aspects of our sport. In the case of strength sports or barbell sports, learning or refining a specific part of a technique of our key lifts will always come first. And these are generally done in one way as part of the warm-up and another way as a technique primer. If we also want to work on a specific aspect that really relies on the nervous system, such as speed, timing, coordination, that will be the first exercise in the program. They're not going to be the most physically fatiguing, so our muscles and our energy systems aren't going to be the most fatigued by these exercises, but what we will find is they're generally more demanding and fatiguing on our nervous system, especially if it's a new skill or a weakness and we're trying to refine that skill more. After any skill or technique work is completed, then power exercises are ranked second in their demand on our nervous system. So they won't be as heavy as strength exercises, but they are a lot faster. Due to the fact we're applying force at speed, it will have a greater demand on our nervous system and on our muscular system. Say for example, you have a maximum deadlift of 200 kilograms and your maximum clean and jerk is 100 kilograms. That 100 kilogram clean is more likely going to be more demanding on your body than the 200 kilogram deadlift. Even though the weight's twice as much, the speed is more than twice as fast. Our fast twitch muscle fibers have to action in the correct sequence and timing fast. A deadlift, whilst is a test of absolute strength for that particular lift, is going to be a lot slower. So our nervous system will still be under a large amount of demand, but nowhere near as much as a technical lift such as a clean. Moving on from power, next is absolute strength. So any strength work will generally follow power exercises. And what we also see is our reps start to increase as well. So with our power exercises, our reps are generally limited between 1 and 3. When it comes to our absolute strength exercises, our reps really start at 3 and might go to 4, 5, 6, sometimes even 7 or 8 reps. But those rep ranges are increasing as the overall or relative intensity is decreasing. Following our strength work, we then move into hypertrophy work. And again, we're actually seeing more targeted areas that we're trying to grow. The actual intensity of hypertrophy work is lower than absolute strength work. It's less demanding on our nervous system, and it's less demanding on the force output of our actual muscular system. It will be fatiguing, but it'll be only fatiguing of our muscular system and our energy system. So with hypertrophy work, we also see our reps start to increase. We might start at reps of 8, anywhere up to 15, sometimes even 20 reps. And our volume is going to be much larger as well. So we can generally tolerate a larger training load of hypertrophy work than what we can strength work, and in turn even less when it comes to power work. We might be doing 4 sets of 10 back squats for hypertrophy work. We will not be doing 4 sets of 10 power cleans or power jerks, for example. After hypertrophy work comes in strength endurance to maintain repetition effort at a lower intensity. Our reps are going to be significantly higher. We're looking at 20 reps, sometimes even more. But the actual overall fatigue in our nervous system is significantly low compared to anything else we've done. Following on from any strength endurance work, then our general conditioning work. Say for example, our session has both a strength and a conditioning element in the same session. We're generally always going to do that strength work, and that includes power, strength, hypertrophy, strength endurance, before we then move on to even lower intensity, no resistance exercises and start working on our conditioning. What we see, the general pattern is our nervous system load and fatigue is decreasing. Now, that might seem simple enough. There's an exact order. There are exceptions, of course. So whilst this framework might give a model that works most of the time, it can't be applied all the time. And there's always exceptions to rules. The first Really common exception that both Mark and Jackson will see in their program is when we're doing complexes. A complex is sort of similar to a superset. So a complex will see different exercises completed in the same set. So for example, we might do snatch pull followed by snatch, and that is the actual exercise. One snatch pull to one snatch, or it could be two snatch pulls to three snatches, or three snatch pulls to one snatch, and we can vary it a number of ways. With a complex, we're not always going to follow this specific exercise order. And there's generally a good reason why. We're trying to reinforce our specific skill or technique first. Whilst we might do an exercise that's less demanding on our nervous system, we're trying to reinforce a specific motor pattern. And in reality, we actually find we're still complying with the rules because we're working on our skill and technique first. We're trying to execute a later exercise in the complex more correctly or more technically proficient. Other times in a complex, we'll be deliberately trying to fatigue specific parts of a lift. So we're trying to overload the lift specifically, and as opposed to just doing more and more of the same lift, we might induce a degree of fatigue first that then leads into that lift being harder. The other major exception to our exercise order is when it comes to sport or competition practice. So as I talked about earlier, specificity always has to be considered with exercise order. At the start of our program, the amount of sport or competition practice is going to be relatively low compared to our general development. As we get closer and closer to our competition, sport or competition practice is going to increase significantly. So as our sport and competition practice nears or gets closer, our program should become more specific. We'll see a transition in the sequencing of exercises to be more specific and replicate better our competition or sporting conditions. Take for example someone who wants to compete in functional fitness at the affiliate All-Stars or CrossFit Regionals for example. They might be unable to do double unders. So at the start of their program and lead up, they want to be able to do double unders. They're going to do double unders right at the start of their session for skill work. And that's their attempts, and that's learning how to do double unders. As the competition gets closer and closer, they're going to start doing double unders under fatigue later on in the session because that's replicating their sport and their competition practice. And then when they go to the actual competition, they've then conducted their skill work or a specific technique under fatigue. It's not the first time they've done it. We need to consider specificity at all stages. The trick is not to be overly specific, but we need to see a gradual progression and build up towards our competition or our sporting event. And that's the time when we can change the exercise order to better replicate our sport or our competition conditions. At the start of our program, however, it's not the most beneficial way to learn or refine technique. Skill work and technique work is not well developed under fatigue. However, at a certain point in training, we need to practice skill and technique work under fatigue. The takeaways from this Whiteboard Wednesday: firstly, consider what your goals and what your priorities are first, before you even consider where an exercise should be in your program. If it's more important to improve your squat than improve your deadlift, hot tip, you should probably be squatting before you deadlift. We have a general framework listed here. Firstly, skill work, followed by power work, absolute strength, hypertrophy, strength endurance, then conditioning work. There are exceptions, and we really need to consider what phase or what part of the program we're in, how close we are from competition. And as we're further away from competition, it's better to follow an order similar to this. As we get closer and closer towards competition, we really need to nail down and refine our sports practice. Thanks for tuning into this Whiteboard Wednesday. Don't forget to check out our website, ascensionbarbell.com. And if you have any questions on the Whiteboard Wednesday, or if you'd like it to cover a specific topic, please let us know, leave a comment.